Oh, okay. That's fine.
Thank you.
Moving on, tonight's agenda, we'll start out with the approval of the minutes. Then we'll go to department opening remarks. Then we go to our public comment session that we normally have. There are no official public hearings on the agenda tonight. We have 3 items of old business. And we have 1 item for consideration under the new business category. And then we have 1 other item of which Joe or Travis will present. And that's the agenda. So moving on to the approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of December 7th, 2020?
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Helfrey, motion, second by Commissioner Broyles. We'll do a voice vote on this. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I will
Abstentions?
abstain.
Okay. Does that work? Do we have enough people to approve that?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Young on this. Mr. Young, we only have 6 commission members tonight. We just had an abstention, which means the minutes didn't receive 6 votes. But I believe that the 6 vote requirement is only for recommendations and actions relative to zonings, site plans, etc.
And that is correct. A simple majority is all of those in attendance is always required for approval of the minutes. So you have sufficient votes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Okay, the minutes are approved. Moving on, Mr. Vunish, does the department have any opening remarks?
Yes, sir. Just a couple, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. First of all, I tried to introduce Miss Ward from Ward 7 to all of you before the meeting began. That voice you just heard was the city attorney, Miss Ward, John Young, and so he is always with us at Planning and Zoning Commission meetings as well. Secondly, and maybe all of you don't realize this, but to accommodate the public that may not have access to the internet or a good understanding of technology, we do set out paper copies of all the items in the vestibule area off of Main Street. And we also have the meeting streaming in the community room so that if people want to pick up something and read it, or if they want to hear what's going on and they couldn't at home or wherever the situation might be, we do try to make accommodations here for them. So I thought I'd just let you know that since we're all on Zoom tonight, that we are trying to reach out. And Mr. Chair, thank you again. And if there are any questions, but I have completed my task.
Thank you, Mr. Vunish. I'll move on to the public comment session, Mr. Newberry, if there are any people who would like to speak or present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just give the instruction, any of those in attendance via Zoom, if you would like to speak during the public comment session. Now would be the time to use the raise hand feature on Zoom or put a message in the chat, and Kathy or I will let you in to address the commission. Mr. Chair, if we could just give it a few moments to allow someone who may want to speak to do that. And Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand. The majority of those in attendance are petitioners with the agenda items.
Okay, well then we'll move on to our first item under old business, PZ 13-20.
PZ 13-20, Mark and Nancy Fish, 1570 Old State Road, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038, care of SunPro Solar, MCH Road, Mandeville, Louisiana, 70471. A request for a conditional use permit in the NU Non-Urban Residence District, street address 1570 Old State Road, locator number 25U440043, for the installation of roof-mounted solar panels, which are to be so situated on the dwelling and accessory structure, garage, as to be visible from adjoining roadways. This request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415.090 NU Non-Urban Residence District Regulations of the City of Wildwood Zoning Ordinance, which establishes standards and requirements for the installation of solar panels. The requested permit is required due to the panel's placement on the front-facing area of the roofs of the dwelling and accessory structure, Ward 6.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich. turn it
Thank you,
over to
Mr. Chair. Oh, my apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Tonight, the department has prepared for your consideration the draft letter of recommendation that reflects the action of the Planning and Zoning Commission at its last meeting on December 7th. If the Planning and Zoning Commission members will recall, at that time, there was a favorable vote of the commission, 6-0 with one abstention, to grant the conditional use permit for the requested solar energy system. I do want to make a point. At that time, Commissioner Helfrey made an amendment asking that the vegetation that is critical to screening the solar energy system on the front portion of the dwelling be preserved, and that the owners of the property think ahead in terms of that preservation if a tree or other type of planting were to die. In the report on page 18, item number 7 is the wording the department has developed relative to that direction from the commission. I note that as the only change that came out of that favorable vote, the letter of recommendation in draft form is ready for final action tonight. And after a motion or a second, or the chair opening the floor for discussion, the Department of Planning would be glad to respond to any questions and assist with any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. One question I have is we have blue text and then red text. Is there something significant with that?
The blue text is more, well, within the body of the report, it's just a way to define different components of the recommendation. So that's the first 17 pages. In the attachment, which is primarily what we do, all of that information in the report is leading to the attachment B, the conditions. And the blue text in that case is the new condition that was requested by the commission members at the last meeting.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
I'll open this up for discussion or a motion to act on the department's recommendation.
Motion to approve the department's recommendation.
Okay, Commissioner Beatty, there's a motion. A second from Commissioner Depler. So let's see, are we doing this as a roll call, Mr. Newberry? Yes. Okay, so roll call vote.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
yes,
Commissioner Ward,
yes,
Chair Lee.
Yes,
Thank you.
motion passes.
Thank you.
On the agenda, we didn't have the roll call block, so that's why I ask. Mr. Newberry, when you're ready, PZ 10-20.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Newberry will be presenting the next two,
Oh,
so
okay.
you'll have to listen to my voice, read
You
the
can do the
advertisements.
Okay, thanks.
My
Mr.
apologies.
Vunich.
Thank you, sir. PZ 10-20, Brad Jordan, 1190 Babbler Park Drive, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038, is seeking the review and action of the Planning and Zoning Commission regarding an outdoor game court, which has already been constructed and located at 1190 Babbler Park Drive, St. Louis County locator number 21W140101, NU non-urban resident district. This request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415.090 NU, Non-Urban Resident District Regulations of the City of Wildwood Zoning Code, which establishes standards and requirements for outdoor game courts relating to their considerations by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The completed outdoor game court is situated on the southeast side of the existing single-family dwelling and placed outside of the front and side yard setback areas, which does constitute an accessory use to the primary residential activity. This particular property is located in Ward 3, and Mr. Newberry will be presenting.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry, I'll turn the screen to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll begin the department's presentation with a brief slideshow presentation by sharing my screen. The first slide shows the property identified with the teal blue color. It's a 16.32 acre property located along State Route BA or Babler Park Drive. The next slide is the site plan showing the improvements upon the property. The court is in the lower right-hand corner of the property, with the single-family dwelling being located here. The next slide is a photograph of the existing court, the basketball hoop, the netting, and the light standard. This is looking towards the east, toward the property line. This is also looking towards the east, so that's the other corner of the court. And then the final photograph, just graph is standing atop the hill that you saw in the previous slides, looking towards the west and the single family dwelling. With that completion of the slideshow presentation, Mr. Chair will begin the department's presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The department has prepared for your consideration a report with recommendation regarding existing outdoor game court on a 16.32 acre property located on Babler Park Drive, otherwise known as State Route PA. The court has been installed without the benefit of the required authorizations and permits. The property owner was advised of the need to obtain the necessary permits for improvements such as this, which includes the authorization of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Mr. Jordan has submitted the appropriate application and information to begin the review process. The department has prepared a favorable recommendation for this outdoor game court, which is a pickleball court that also includes a half-court basketball court on the same court surface. The location of the court on the property is compliant with the city's requirements, being placed outside of the front and side yard setback areas. While the court is located in front of the single-family dwelling, it is not visible from the street, given the existence of mature woodlands between the street and the court itself. The department would note the property is not part of a subdivision and therefore isn't a party to a homeowners association or any associated restrictions that are typically part of the homeowners association. The department would note that along with the court, there is a lighting component that has been installed. The department's favorable recommendation for the outdoor game court and the associated lighting is conditioned upon three components relating to the lighting standard. The first being that with the recommendation that all necessary authorizations and permits be obtained by the property owner for the completed work, electrical work associated with the lighting standard. That the second being the light standard appears to be, based on the specification sheets provided by the property owner, 17 feet in height, which is taller than the city's outdoor lighting requirements permit. Therefore, the height of the lighting standard will need to be lowered to no higher than 16 feet to bring it into compliance. And third, the verification of compliance to the city's outdoor lighting requirements, including the review of the lamp and lumen levels by the city's lighting consultant. In conclusion, the department is recommending approval of the outdoor game court conditioned on the items outlined in its report, specifically relating to the lighting standard. With that, Mr. Chair, with a motion and a second for chair opening the floor for discussion, department's available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. I'll open this up for discussion or a motion on the department's recommendation. Mr. Vunich,
Mr. Chair, just one item I'd like to add, not so much to the presentation, but today we received a number of comments from over the weekend. One of those comments related to this particular proposal. And so I just wanted to draw your attention to that fact. Thank you.
thank you. Is there a motion or any discussion on this? Commissioner Helfrey?
I just had a question and then I'd like to make a motion. My question is to Joe and Travis, and that is, if they don't get the permits and they don't do the lights, what happens then? And according to this, how long do they have to come into compliance?
Well, with the permission of Mr. Newberry, in the past, when outdoor game courts have been installed without the benefit of a permit, and there isn't a solution to the issues that may arise from such, in many cases, they're placed in the setback areas of the lot. We have asked the owners to remove them. In terms of a time frame, the key component of the department's recommendation, the conditions associated with it, relate to lighting. This is a rural area. Rural areas, we're quite protective of the dark sky and any nuisance glare that might be associated with it. Given our lighting consultant is very busy, I would say that I would hope to have back to Mr. Jordan, the petitioner, as well as the commission, any comments, that's if there are any, relative to the light standard and the lighting levels associated with it in about a month's time.
So they have to lower the light and then we have to send somebody out to check the light output.
Typically, we don't send someone out unless there's an issue of trespass. Oftentimes, the manufacturer will create the information we need in terms of a lighting plan for the light standard based upon the selected lumen and lighting levels. And we just send that information via email to the lighting consultant. And the lighting consultant generally can make comments from that.
Okay.
Commissioner Broyles?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Chair Lee. The comment that you received, Mr. Vunich, was that a favorable comment or were there concerns?
It was not a favorable comment. The particular individual noted that when outside enjoying the outdoors, oftentimes she can hear the ball being hit back and forth if it's tennis, or the basketball being bounced. There's also occasion when she hears the sneakers on the hard surface, and then also conversation, or not necessarily yelling, but yelling when someone hits a good shot or something akin to that. And her point was that she moved to this area for peace and quiet, and she doesn't think the outdoor game court is consistent with such.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Mr. Vunich, this, if I'm correct, may be the first game court that we have with a light.
That's my recollection, sir. Most of the game courts have been in the R districts, not the non-urban resident district. And there is a prohibition against lighting in the R districts. There is only the allowance for lighting in the NU non-urban resident district.
Do we have the right to request for time limit on this, like in the evening, so that they?
I think within the context of your review process, you can assign conditions. I would defer to Mr. Young if I'm incorrect, because certainly we don't want you to do something that's not appropriate. But in most instances, whether it's a conditional use permit or a zoning, conditions associated with an action usually are typical.
Mhm.
but I'll defer to Mr. Young.
I know with the activities at the Big Chief Restaurant, we identified, a shutdown time so that we could maintain the area noise levels and light levels. And I'm thinking maybe we should do a light level, lights off at like 10 o'clock p.m. on, any given day. So that's my thoughts on this with if the neighbors are hearing, and we have a letter already. And like I said, this is our first sport court with a light. So I could see this being a problem, late into the hours of the evening. Commissioner Helfrey.
So I respectfully disagree with that one point, but only partially. So when I look at the overview of this, it looks like it's very close to the junior high. What is the light constraints for the junior high lights on the fields? What time do those have to be turned off?
Ms. Helfrey, the lighting of the athletic field I don't believe the athletic field is lit, first of all.
Okay. What about the parking lot lights?
The parking lot lighting is substantial. That lighting design and the standards themselves predate Wildwood. And so as many parking lots that you experience when you go to commercial areas or institutional uses, the general rule of thumb is they make the standards taller so that they can do fewer of them and save money. The taller the standard, the harder it is to control light, and then you create that glare that impacts the dark sky. So in many regards, the problem isn't necessarily this standard. If there is a problem, it comes from the parking lot lighting at the middle school in what again is a very dark environment.
Right, and this looks like it's surrounded in heavy woods on their property. And so I don't know. I think that in this particular instance, in my opinion, I just don't think that we should limit them on when they can leave their light on, especially if it's in compliance with all of our rules. And so I mean, that's just me. I just think that limiting them the amount of time that they can then use their court in this, it doesn't look like it can be seen from anywhere. So the only people that are being impacted by the light is their light. The complaint was about the ping sound of the ball. So I'm going to make a motion that we approve this with the condition that they come into compliance with the lighting within, a given time frame.
I have a question. So to clarify, what is our, what consequence would happen if they don't? If we say they can't and they do? What consequences or what rules or regulations do we have to enforce?
The Department of Planning would begin an enforcement action with the prosecuting attorney via our municipal court. And so typically we don't get to that stage, fortunately. Most of our residents, when mistakes are made, are pretty obliging to address them in a reasonable time frame. It's not always the case, but when Mr. Jordan was advised of the issue, he began the process immediately. So he's been very cooperative. And Mr. Chair, I know Mr. Young was going to help me out here if you'd give him an opportunity. And then Mr. Cross had his hand up as well.
Yeah, I'll go to Mr. Young in a minute. I'll ask the department, what's the distance to the closest residence? It'd be across the street, I would imagine.
Yes, and I don't have the exact measurement, but the Route BA, I believe, is a 60-foot right-of-way. Now, that's not the pavement area, it's the full width of the right-of-way. And so I'm going to estimate somewhere in the range of 120 feet. Maybe Miss Arnett or Mr. Newberry can do that quick calculation for me.
Okay, while that's going on, Mr. Young.
Well, to the question of our conditions appropriate for this particular application? The answer in very short is yes. It's a conditional use permit, and that's the entire purpose of this process, so that you can review and impose conditions as deemed necessary to generally protect the health, safety, welfare of the adjoining property owners.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you.
And I would
Well-
like to second Vicky's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chair, if you could just maybe give us a second.
Sure.
I think Kathy is working on it.
So court, from the edge of the court to the nearest residence is 300 feet.
Well,
Okay.
I'm glad we
if you-
waited.
Yeah, well, property line to property
Yes.
line is much closer, more in the range of, yeah, Joe was almost right on the money at just over 100 feet.
Right. That makes a difference.
Mhm.
And Miss and Arnett was just being nice by saying property line to property line. I missed it by a country mile.
All right, we have a motion on the floor to approve with the conditions that the owner obtain required county permits. We'll go into a roll call vote.
And Mr. Chair, not to interrupt, but Mr. Cross had his hand up. I don't know if you want to
Okay.
recognize him.
Yes, go ahead. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I did get my question answered earlier, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes,
Commissioner Ward,
Yes,
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes,
Chair Lee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm. Motion passes. So Mr. Vunich, you're up for PZ 14-20.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, PZ 14-20, Brian and Ellie Readers, 17560 Garden Ridge Circle, Wildwood, Missouri 63038, is seeking the review and action of the Planning and Zoning Commission on the requested installation of an outdoor game court that will be 30 feet by 45 feet in size and to be located at 17560 Garden Ridge Circle, St. Louis County locator number 21V 230092, R1 1 acre resident district. The request is to be reviewed in accordance with Chapter 415 110 R1 1 acre resident district regulations of the City of Wildwood zoning code, which establishes standards and requirements for outdoor game courts relating to their consideration by the Planning and Zoning Commission. In this instance, the proposed game court is to be situated to the south of the existing single-family dwelling located on the subject property. The Department of Planning will have a recommendation report on this request prepared for consideration at tonight's meeting. This particular property is also located in Ward 3. And Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Newberry would like to begin his presentation at your permission.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll again begin the department's presentation with the slideshow. I'll share my screen now. First slide is to give you an idea of where the lot is located in the Garden Valley Farms subdivision. To the left of the image is State Route 109. The subject lot is highlighted in the light blue color. Next slide is a more close-up aerial of the subject site. You'll note the pool improvement that's already in place. And then the next photo is the plot plan that depicts the court in red. And then the next few slides will just be photographs to orient you on the site. The first two are standing and looking to the east towards the property line. The first standing at the pool area, the second standing from the location of the proposed court. The next set of photographs is looking toward the west. First is standing at the location of the proposed court, and the second shows a more straight-on view of the side yard area. And the next two photographs depict two mature trees, which will be identified in the department's report or presentation this evening. It was like they were identified in the department's report as well. And this is the southern area of the rear yard. The fence is not the property line. And then just another view looking directly towards the rear property line beyond the fence. Again, that tree is identified in the department's report. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you. The department has prepared for your consideration a report with recommendation regarding a proposed outdoor game court on a property located within the Garden Valley Farm subdivision. The proposed outdoor game court is planned to be placed upon a property that is slightly less than 1/2 acre in area. The department has prepared a favorable recommendation for this outdoor game court, which is a half-court basketball court. First, the department would begin, this property is in a subdivision and subject to a homeowners association review. The petitioner has engaged it's the homeowners association of the Garden Valley Farm subdivision regarding this planned improvement. The trustees have corresponded with the property owner and stated that it will not grant its authorization until such time the city grants its authorization for the outdoor game court. The department is recommending the commission grant approval of the outdoor game court condition on the final verification by the Department of Planning that the homeowners association has provided the authorization it needs to before the department would issue any permits for the court's construction. The placement of the court is located in the rear yard area behind the single family dwelling and will not be visible from the street, the Garden Ridge Circle. The property owner is proposing the placement of a total of 10 plantings of green giant arborvitae, 5 each along each of the side yard areas of the lot along the court. The landscaping in conjunction with the existing metal fence will prevent any projectiles from exiting the property onto neighboring properties, as well as provide a visual screen of the court from the neighboring properties, both key components to the city's regulations regarding outdoor game courts. Another key consideration of an improvement such as this is the impact of the additional impervious surface on stormwater management on the site. The Department of Planning, along with the Department of Public Works, did visit the site. The Assistant City Engineer, Dan Ron, did not offer any concern regarding stormwater management in association with the court, but did note that a grading permit would be required to verify such. Also during that site visit, in discussion with the homeowners, Mr. Redders, 2 mature trees were identified, which were shown in the photographs in the slideshow presentation as being potentially needed to be removed for removal, to be removed in conjunction with the installation of the outdoor game court. As it stated in its report, the department is not inclined to recommend approval for an improvement such as this if it resulted in the removal of 2 mature trees. But the department does believe that the design of the court, the grading of the site, and the height of the retaining wall can be modified to accommodate the court while also protecting and retaining these 2 mature trees. So in summary, the department is recommending approval of the proposed outdoor game court conditioned upon obtaining a grading permit to ensure stormwater management is sufficient. The required landscaping that is proposed by the petitioner is required. That the authorization from the homeowners association be received and verified by the department before the issuance of any building permits. And then again, the retention of the 2 mature trees identified. With that, Mr. Chair, the motion in a second, or the chair opening the floor for discussion. The department's available for any questions, and I would note Mr. Redders is on the call with us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. I'll open this up for discussion or a motion, or we can hear from the applicant. Mr. Vunich.
Again, just to be consistent, today you received a package or packet of comments relating to the items on tonight's agenda. One of those comments was relative to this particular request. And from reading the comment, the resident that submitted it is in favor of the request and was just concerned about noise and lighting. And in this particular instance, there is no lighting associated with the outdoor game court. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Commissioner Helfrey.
Thank you, Chair Lee. Mr. Vunich, I am looking at the drawing, the plat drawing with the sport court drawn in, okay? And it says on here, natural wood line. And so that would be, I guess, where the fence is? Is that what I'm kind of, okay. So my question is, from where the sport court is to the back of their property, does the back of their property go down?
Yes, the last photograph that Mr. Newberry had on the screen, if you could bring that up, Mr. Newberry, I would appreciate it. I think that's the best representation, Commissioner Helfrey.
So I guess my question, yeah, so it goes way down, and then there's homes behind their property, is that correct?
Yes, a pretty substantial distance, and that can be reflected on another of the photographs that has the aerial associated with it.
Right, it looks pretty far, and there's not going to be lighting, so that's not going to be an issue. I guess one of the questions I have is, when we look at this, where will the retaining wall for this be? Will it be towards the pool, or will it be towards the wooded area?
Given the grade of the lot, I would surmise that it would be toward the wooded area. But as Mr. Newberry mentioned, Mr. Readers is on the call tonight, and we can invite him in and he can respond to that question direct. Oh, there he is. You got here quick.
Yeah, Mr. Readers, would you like to answer the question on, you're going to need a retaining wall as either uphill or downhill side?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, thank you for the consideration, and Vicky, thank you for the question. The retaining wall would be on the backside toward the woods. And the letter that we received back on September 8th from our subdivision had said that if the height of the wall is more than 4 feet, that we'll need to get a permit from St. Louis County, which our landscaping company is aware of. I do have Chris Graham, I believe, who's with Conroy Landscape, a local landscape company, in the event there were more questions that were above my pay grade, if that would be helpful. But my understanding, there he is. Thank you, Chris, too, for giving up your night to hang out with us here. I don't think Chris and his team, when they looked at the grading and what they would need to do, they didn't think that the retaining wall would be higher than 4 feet. They thought it would be closer to 3 feet or less. If that changes and we need to get a permit, we certainly will.
And then the only other question at this time from myself would be, how does that, it's far enough away from the fence that it won't affect the security of the pool, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And one of the design ideas that the landscapers came up with was to, so as you go from our house, you've got the pool, then you've got a little bit of concrete as you head toward the woods, was to actually drop down subtly and do some landscape plantings that would obviously look very nice too, to lower it just a touch, to also, try to keep balls from going up toward the pool area, and to also try to make the retaining wall a little bit smaller. The higher the retaining wall, clearly the higher the risk of injury. And I do have 2 kids that I'd like to protect, and certainly their friends if they're overplaying. I do want to say this, even at the risk of this slowing down the process, in further examining those 2 trees, and Chris did come over today, and as you get to know Chris, he's wildwood through and through and loves the trees, and we're disappointed and saddened that there is a potential that those two trees are sort of in the way, if you will. And Chris had shared with me today that he thought, just as, you know, again, as a consideration and being open and honest and transparent and just no games here, let's do this right if we're going to do it at all, that there was a high likelihood that even if we do this court and try to protect those trees, they're not going to survive. And I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I trust Chris's judgment on that. So he had a thought or a couple thoughts to try to, you know, give back to the community and keep Wildwood beautiful and what have you. If those two trees aren't going to make it anyway, and if we were to take them down, and maybe there's an additional process there that we're willing to go through, we could always get rid of some of the honeysuckle, plant some additional trees in the woods. We could make a donation. You know, we want to do what we can to keep Wildwood beautiful for all of us. We all love this place. This is home. We've been here for 14 years. We brought our kids home from the hospital here. We're not going anywhere. They're going to Lafayette, and they love basketball. We want to get them away from our pool, which is where they play now. And they have fallen in the pool playing hard. And, you know, I'm worried about that injury as much as anything. So I think the sport court is safer. If I can get them away from the pool, that would be desirable. And our neighbors down the hill are very far down the hill. You know, it's a very private area where that sport court would be. Travis was able to walk the backyard, so he saw that. But I think if I'm completely being upfront, especially after my conversation with Chris today, I don't have a good feeling, sadly, about those two trees. And I don't want to move this thing forward without at least some discussion about that. Chris, do you mind jumping in here if that's appropriate? You'll have to unmute him maybe.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
I mean, again, thanks, Brian. Kind words. And I appreciate you guys all discussing this with us, but we just kind of feel like the constraints of the project with a redesign might not give Brian the size sport court that he really needs. And this is going to be a little bit of a project, you know, costly. And we just want to make sure that we get Brian the size of the sport court that he wants so that his kids can enjoy it. And he feels like it's a nice project. I feel like when you do construction in an area like that, even if we redesigned that project to pull the retaining wall just in front of those existing trees that we're trying to protect, the amount of just impact from construction and then raising the grade, you know, in the root system of those existing trees is probably going to cause some detriment to those trees in the future. And if it doesn't kill them right away, you know, it's not the best conditions moving forward for those specific trees. We were just hoping that we could go through the process of removing those trees and also creating new landscape in lieu of those two trees. I don't know what Wildwood's process is on that. If you guys have ever had some consideration for removing trees and trying to pay it forward either on Brian's property or in a more public place. But I don't know, I guess I'll defer to someone else that might know more about that process of, you know, from what I understand, there's an application process for removing those trees. Shall we need to? Is that correct?
Depending if the trees are designated grand trees or not, there is a formula for grand trees that's somewhat onerous at times, depending on the diameter of the trunk. For the most part, though, if a tree is removed as part of construction, we generally try to mitigate that as best as possible with either a similar planting or multiple plantings that would eventually provide the same benefit. So from the question the department has, with the permission of the chair, if the two trees were authorized to be removed from the building area, once the game court is installed, is there space enough to put landscaping back between the edge of the game court and the existing fence? Or would the landscaping have to go elsewhere?
The landscaping, that we propose to move the fence to the top of the retaining wall, which is actually
Okay.
pushing that wall, but beyond where the existing fence line is. But I do believe that there is a lot of space behind the proposed retaining wall to the edge of the property line. That is very nice wooded area where we could replant, say, dogwoods and redbuds in lieu of the existing honeysuckle that's there as a part of this project to, I guess, beautify that section of native woodland right there. That's what I would propose. Honestly, I think Brian would benefit from that as well, as just from the beauty of his own property and the neighbors also. The honeysuckle I know is an issue, so there's quite a bit of it back there.
Mr. Newberry, could you do me a favor with the permission of the chair? Could you bring up that photograph of the rear property line?
The back
The one that
area,
was
yeah.
taken- The one that was taken on an angle?
So Joe, I was looking at this, if that sketch is to scale, there's probably 25 feet of property behind the existing fence right now that is part of the tract, which means that he could plant anywhere back in there once they remove the honeysuckle. And there is a void right there behind the one tree that they're trying to take out, which could use a tall tree. So I would be in favor of this if they cleaned out the honeysuckle and basically remove the trees, because their likelihood of them living is small, and then do a new planting back here and clean up that wood line. Commissioner
Mr.
Helfrey?
Oh, pardon.
Mr. Vunich, is there a natural resource protection line back there anywhere?
No, ma'am. This predates the incorporation of Wildwood.
Okay, so would I be out of line to say that we postpone this for, I don't know, 2 weeks or 30 days and have them work all that out and then come back to us with accurate drawings of what they want to do? Because I myself am just a little confused. We've heard that they may move the trees, they may move the fence, they may move the retaining wall. And so I think I would feel a little more comfortable if we had a little more accurate design before we approved it. So would that be appropriate?
Oh, Commissioner Helfrey, the next meeting is in 2 weeks, depending on Mr. Graham and Mr. Readers. If they feel they can be ready in 2 weeks, we could certainly have it back that quick, which hopefully still keeps them in the building season before much of spring is over. And I think it's a good suggestion. I think the inclination based upon the chair's comment is to allow the 2 mature trees to be removed, but a desire to see a planting pattern that would compensate for that removal. And the 2 weeks would give ample time for everybody to sit down and put their best work on paper, and then that's what you could see on February 1st.
So then I'm going to make a motion to postpone for 2 weeks. And when they bring this back, I'd like to see the plan as it's supposed to be built, with the fence and the retaining walls, where they are going to be, and the trees, if they're removed, what is going to be planted in replace of that.
That's a good suggestion, Vicky. I'm comfortable with that. Chris, will you be able to work with me over the next 2 weeks?
For sure. No, I think that's very fair. We can get it put together for
That
sure.
would actually make me feel more comfortable as a homeowner too, because I want what you want, Vicky. I'd like to see that as well. So I'll be quiet now and let you guys carry on. Thank you again for listening and helping us out.
Yeah, we would have came prepared with all of this had we not thought of it a little further ahead. You know, we weren't really sure about the trees, and so we'd be more than happy to provide all the documentation to make this legitimate. Yep.
Commissioner Helfrey, could I add something to your comment? If they could take the drawing that they have of the lot and actually locate the trees, back to their property line. I think you can do that with the tape, and get close enough. And then provide basically the tree size. I would just do distance across, or should we do diameter, Joe? How should we do that?
The code reads diameter at breast height. I'll defer to Mr. Graham to give us the number he feels most comfortable with.
Yeah, I have a loose number. It's maybe 15 inches a piece, but I will put a caliper on it and get that information put on the plans.
That way we'll have the information that we'll need. Commissioner Deppler.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. When you're doing the measuring of the trees, that was one of my questions, and just the species of the trees, so we potentially could have something comparable or a better, more hardy species of trees replacing it.
Mr. Chair, with your permission.
Yes, go
Commissioner
ahead, Joe.
Deppler, Mr. Graham mentioned maybe doing some dogwoods in that area as for possible replacements. Dogwoods are understory trees we find a lot out here in Wildwood. They generally are with the oak hickory forest. So not to argue the point, but there's some large mature trees in there. The understory is what's suffering due to the bush honeysuckle. It might be a good option just to consider that. And it also adds a lot of color in the spring.
No, I totally can appreciate that. I was just curious, just looking at the trunk of the tree, it could be a walnut or whatever that's existing there. I was just curious what kind of trees were there right now.
And I'm sure Mr. Graham can identify the species and the size, and then maybe give him some flexibility in terms of a planning pattern for the replacement.
That sounds very great. Yeah. No, thank you, Joe, for your comment about the understory, because that's kind of what we were thinking, honestly. And I believe the trees are oaks. They're not in leaf right now, but I believe both of them are oak trees. So.
All right, we have a motion to, okay, Commissioner Helfrey.
Sorry, so I was going to bring back up the motion, but I was going to ask Mr. Vunich, when this comes back in front of us, I hate to ask you for more work, but is it possible for the city to attach to this the only the part of the tree, grand tree or tree preservation guidelines we have that applies to this with the packet you give us?
Yes, ma'am. We'll make it a separate attachment to the report and identify it so it's easy to find.
Yeah, just that one part. Thank you so very much. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a motion to postpone for 2 weeks or longer. I need a second. Commissioner Beatty. Second? Okay, we have a motion to postpone and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, Joe and the applicant will let you work out the details. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have one new business item. I'll flip a coin here, Joe or Mr. Newberry.
I believe
Okay.
Mr. Newberry will be.
Mr. Newberry.
A response to a communication from Tyler Richards, Crown Castle, which is dated November 18, 2020, regarding PZ 4-98 AT&T Wireless Services, Inc., that seeks the Planning and Zoning Commission's review and action on a requested change to the existing conditional use permit governing a 90-foot monopole telecommunications tower and related equipment shelter. This tower and shelter is located on the east side of Joe's Way, north of Valley Road. street address 2028 Joe's Way, St. Louis County locator number 20U540317, in U non-urban residence district with a conditional use permit, thereby allowing for the installation of an additional externally mounted array of antennas that are currently attached onto its exterior, Ward 2.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, we have two gentlemen representing the ownership of the tower, and so I welcome them and thank you for attending. Before the department begins its presentation of the draft report, Mr. Newberry and I put together a very brief slide presentation, and I'd just like to go through it very quickly for the benefit of the commission members. Many of the commission members are familiar with this particular location on Joe's Way to the north of Valley Road. Most recently, at the end of last year, the Planning and Zoning Commission granted the one-year renewal in association with this facility. It was at that time that the Department of Planning recognized a mistake it had made. The mistake was made approximately 4 years ago, but for whatever reason, it came to light in December of last year. And that's the fact that there is a second exterior array of antennas associated with this 90-foot monopole. The next slides were taken today by the Department of Planning, and they're important in that we received 4 comments relative to this particular tower. One comment was positive in regards to the array. The other 3 were received from residents in Clarkson Valley. And so Mr. Newberry and I took the time to go out and basically give you a a photographic representation. And so in the center of the screen, in the background, is the existing 90-foot monopole. And as you can see, it has a large canister that covers the antenna on the top, and then the 2 smaller antenna arrays attached to the exterior. Immediately to the left of it, there is a kind of suspicious looking pine tree, and that's also a telecommunications tower. And that was authorized administratively under our model telecommunications ordinance. Mr. Newberry, the next slide, please. And this is just a close-up from that same location. And as you can see, the petitioner is required to paint the upper half above the tree line a neutral color to blend as best as possible with the horizon or sky. And then on the past slide, the original, the first, you can see that the bottom half is painted to match the woodlands. Mr. Newberry, the next slide. And this is kind of looking at the site between one of the homes. And as you can see, it slopes down from the tower site into a ravine or through ephemeral drainage way, rises up and to the rear yards of the homes that are located in Clarkson Valley. The pine tree, the sky support structure, is a little more visible here. And as you can see, we did our best to make it look as, I guess, innocuous as possible. Mr. Newberry, the next slide. And this is taken a little further back into the subdivision, but from the department's perspective, I actually think the sky support structure, the pine tree, is more noticeable than the tower itself, but that's just the opinion of the director of planning. But this gives you the feel, so to speak, of what Clarkson Valley residents are seeing. And typically, and in all instances, when we have proposals on the border between another municipality, we take the extra step and do contact the neighbors on the other side, so to speak, so they can provide input. And again, we did receive it tonight. Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, the department has prepared for your consideration a draft report with recommendation regarding the requested amendment to this conditional use permit. The conditional use permit was granted in 1998 and over the course of approximately 22 years has received renewals in each of the annual timeframes. The tower provides needed service in portions of rural Wildwood, as well as the more developed locations in Clarkson Valley and the city as well. The error did occur on the part of the Department of Planning. The authorization for the array that is the subject of tonight was thought to be the first array, which is authorized under the existing conditional use permit. But much to our surprise, there was already an array on the exterior, and this was the second to be added. As you can see, the owner of the tower, Crown Castle, followed the requirements of the permit and painted all of the components of that second external or exterior array the color of the tower itself to blend again as best with the horizon. The department is supportive of retaining the second array. We do not believe that the petitioner, in this case, Crown Castle, ignored any of our requirements or the permit. It was an error on the part of the Department of Planning and its director. And we feel that based upon how it's been camouflaged, again, to blend with the horizon, it does not have a substantial impact on the horizon or the surrounding area. And I say that with all due respect to the residents in Clarkson Valley. But again, the array is just a small portion of the overall tower and certainly does not make it any more noticeable or any less noticeable. So therefore tonight, the department is respectfully requesting a favorable action on the report as presented. Mr. Chair, after you open the floor for discussion or a motion and second is made, the Department of Planning will be available to answer any questions regarding the matter. And again, we have two representatives here tonight, I believe from Crown Castle. I'm sure they'd be glad to help if there are questions regarding the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vonich. I'll open this up for discussion or a motion.
I'll move to accept the
Commissioner Beatty.
department's recommendation.
Motion to accept the department's recommendation by Commissioner Beatty.
And I agree with you, Joe. I think it stands out more with the fake branches.
Well, you have younger eyes, so I appreciate that.
I'm not sure two ponderosa pines or redwoods and wildwood makes a lot of sense.
Well, that was kind of the craze for a while, getting pine trees that were monopoles in place, and we kind of caught on to the craze. And like I say, when I look at it, I think it stands out more than the other.
I could second the motion.
Okay. Commissioner Ward seconds. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion to approve the department's recommendations. So we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, I apologize if you don't mind. We're in the unusual age of Zoom, so I'm going to interject for a second. We do have a person who has commented in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting, and we advised them that we would advise the chair that they would like to comment at this time, even though it's outside of the public comment session. So it's at your discretion.
I'll entertain the comment.
Thank you. Let's give us a moment to let them in.
Mm-hmm.
Hello?
We can hear
Are
you.
we live? Hi, this is Matt and Mary Weiss. We live on Joe's Way, and I don't know if we misread this or not. It looks like there's an additional array going on to the tower, or is it just the lack of paint on that additional array that's already been installed?
It is a second array that has already been installed due to an error by the Department of Planning.
Okay, so that additional array is, we're not talking about that at all. We have no say in that being up there. It's just a matter of if it gets painted or not, correct?
Matt, it is already painted to blend with the color of the tower. But yes, that is the question tonight. Should it be retained or not?
Okay. When we purchased our home 6 or so years ago, we had a company come in and do tests inside our home just to measure the level of the EMFs. And we have had that done a couple times since, just because we are probably the closest home to this. There's a valley between us and the tower, but our upper level bedrooms are pretty equivalent to where this array is. And I'd really like to see if they could get our third party back out there to run that test. We just want to make sure that we're safe in there. We've done this a couple times, again, just so that we make sure our son is safe in his bedroom.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, would Mr. Richards be able to assist in this regard, just to kind of dot the I and cross the T?
Yes, Mr. Richard, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you guys for the opportunity to speak about amending our conditional use permit. My name is Tyler Richards. I'm an urban planner with Crown Castle, based out of our Houston, Texas office. And I'd also like to thank Matt for joining the call and asking his question. So as regards to the concerns about radio frequency, RF emissions are not a new concern, and the safety of RF emissions have been studied for more than 60 years. And the research is subject to constant review by government health agencies and standard setting organizations.
So, Mr. Chair, Matt mentioned a third party that had participated previously. If you'd like, we can circle back with Matt tomorrow or whenever convenient for him and see if we can assist in that regard.
Yes, I have no objection to that. I think that would be wise, just so that we have all of this documented.
And as the commission members are aware, if you take a favorable action on the request tonight, it goes to City Council on January 25th. And then they have 15 days before the permit would become effective. So in principle, we have about 3 weeks to make that determination for Matt, or at least give him some information that hopefully will set aside his concerns relative to this matter.
It makes it easier when the array is already installed. We're dealing with actual versus calculated. So
good point.
I think that's a good question, and we should do this. That being said, we have a motion and a second to approve the department's recommendation. Do we have any other people wanting to speak on this, Mr. Newberry? Okay, so let's just move on to a roll call vote.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Before I vote, real quickly, I kept thinking the meeting started at 7, and I forgot that I was in Arizona, so forgive me for being late. And I vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. Commissioner Broyles? Ms. Broyles, I'm sorry, I didn't.
She's on mute.
Yeah. There you
Yeah, yes, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Beatty?
Yes.
Chair Lee?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. That concludes our action items. Mr. Vunish, do you have any remarks?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one more item relating to the Special Circumstances Overlay District, and with your permission, I'll have Mr. Newberry read it into the record.
Okay.
A report of the Department of Planning in conjunction with the city attorney with an accompanying resolution regarding the scheduling of a public hearing for an action on the Special Circumstances Overlay District, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, with the intent to identify certain properties located within the city of Wildwood for its application upon them, which can be applied on any parcel of ground zoned in the NU non-urban residence district or all R residence districts of the city of Wildwood, all wards.
Have to unmute. Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich, I'll go ahead and let you
Thank you,
identify
sir.
this.
I appreciate it. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I am going to need assistance from Mr. Young here in a few minutes, but I wanted to provide you background relative to this particular item. As you know, in 2020, the Planning and Zoning Commission spent much of summer and fall discussing the Special Circumstances Overlay District. It is a new overlay district that is intended to allow the city to gain more information upfront in any zoning process, that information being critical to the public's health, safety, and welfare. Also to ensure that that information identifies any particular environmental hazards or those that may be man-made in nature. Additionally, the overlay district, the Special Circumstances Overlay District, also required more rigorous review by the city and its appointed board, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and City Council itself. And equally, if not more important, after a project were to be approved, it also now stipulates that the owners of property, from the initial buyer on, must be aware of why this particular project is part of this Special Circumstances Overlay District. The regulations were developed, they were refined by the Planning and Zoning Commission, they were refined by the City Council and ultimately adopted. During that discussion, the department made it clear that this was, for the most part, 2 phases. That the first phase was actually developing the regulations to know what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And the second phase was actually identifying those properties that would be subject to the Special Circumstances Overlay District. It's a very unique approach from the standpoint of the city. It's not an unusual approach, but just unique in the case that this is the first time that we've created an overlay district and we'll look at properties that will be subject to it, not necessarily accepting them from the property owner as the only source. Tonight, the department has prepared a cover memorandum that explains why the Special Circumstances Overlay District was necessary. And also, as we move into this second phase, why we need to do it with a great deal of care and research, and that a timeline will extend not only from tonight, but through probably late spring, early summer. The first step to begin this process of designating properties is to adopt the resolution that has been prepared by our city attorney. What that resolution does is authorize the Department of Planning via the Planning and Zoning Commission to begin the public hearing process regarding these sites. We typically don't do this, but again, remember, the Special Circumstances Overlay District will require much more of all of us, from the property owner, the other service providers, other commenting agencies, the Planning and Zoning Commission, the City Council, and the Department of Planning. So we're wanting to make sure that we do this with plenty of notification, ample time to comment, and a high degree of transparency. So the department will be asking tonight that the Planning and Zoning Commission, by motion, second, and voice vote, by roll call, adopts the resolution. I would ask now that with the permission of the chair, that Mr. Young maybe go over this a little bit better than I just did. As the author of the resolution, I think he is the best person to explain it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I'll turn it over to Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not going to belabor the points because I think Mr. Vunich covered everything very well. But just to reiterate one point, this is a unique step that is not typically taken by the Planning and Zoning Commission, but it is a step consistent with the provisions of the city code. And what makes this unique is the city is going to be rezoning properties without petition. So typically when the city rezones property, it does so based upon a petition submitted by an applicant or a property owner. So this is a different approach, a legal approach, an allowable approach, but it is an initiation of the rezoning process made by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And per our ordinances, that's why a resolution is required. And what this resolution does, and consistent with Mr. Vunich's comments, we're adding additional steps that would otherwise be required in the city code. So there will be one general public hearing for the process, and then specific public hearings for once properties are identified for rezoning. And those public hearings will also have the benefit of not only a published public hearing notice, but also the mailed and posted notices that the code requires. With that, I'm open to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you. Commissioner Broyles. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Mr. Young, could you emphasize a little bit more how the health and safety of these procedures are carried out when rezoning?
Let me restate the question just to make sure I'm understanding it. Are you asking me to tell you what the procedures in the SCOD are once properties are rezoned?
Isn't Mr. Vunich mentioned that this was for health and safety before we rezone of that property? Am I correct on that?
Well, I think what he's referencing is, as you may recall, several months ago, this Planning and Zoning Commission made a recommendation to the City Council to adopt regulations establishing an SCOD district regulation. So the Special Circumstances Overlay District regulation. That is the health safety regulation. And as we discussed at that time, the next step in this process is to apply that regulation to specific properties. So now what we're doing is identifying those properties to which this regulation will apply. So the health safety component of it was the adoption of the regulation. And then now we're at that next step of specifically applying those health safety regulations to specifically identified properties.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm really clear on this. Do you identify the properties having a health and safety issues before it is approved for that changing in, or the overlay district?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, I believe that's what this first public hearing is intended to do, is for the Planning and Zoning Commission to identify properties that are of such a history, environmental history or condition, and I'm using environmental very generally speaking, but of an environmental condition that would warrant additional review provided for in the SCOD. So that is the first step. What this first hearing is intended to do is for the commission to review and identify properties that they believe should be included in that district based upon that criteria. And then the next step, which will be additional public hearings, is to actually rezone those properties to impose that regulation on the property.
Okay, that's clearer for me. Thank you.
Commissioner Helfrey.
My question is for Attorney Young. What I understand everything that you said to this point. My question is, what happens when down the road we have these properties designated as for this to apply? Well, what happens down the road when another piece of property that wasn't designated for this, it turns out that it is a health or safety or environmental nuisance? What happens then?
Okay, yeah, so this designation isn't your last bite at the apple. If at some time in the future, a property, let's say it's put on the national priorities list and has EPA remediation done on it, following this similar process, the Planning and Zoning Commission by resolution can move forward with public hearings and the imposition of that overlay district on that property. So this is your first identification of those known properties. If there are later known properties identified in the future, we can go through this process again.
Okay, thank you. So then, Joe, I have one question for you, and that is, a couple of years ago when I first started on the Planning and Zoning Commission, there was a lot of talk about a property over by the community college that used to be, if I use the right terms, an illegal junkyard or dumping ground for stuff. That is in a cultural and institutional area, right? Would that be something that this could apply to?
It's certainly good. It certainly could, Commissioner Helfrey, because again, there are environmental characteristics, although these are man-made, that would render concerns about the public's health, safety, and welfare.
Okay, so they don't have to just be in the non-urban or residential. It can also be in other areas as well.
Yes, typically, Ms. Helfrey, we focus on the residential districts because in principle, you have to assume that if somebody resides in a home, they can be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so oftentimes environmental regulations, that is the tip of the pyramid, that which is most protected, and then commercial, then industrial. Because again, people are in commercial settings and industrial settings there for less of a time frame. And there's an assumed risk associated with some of those. But we always treat the top of the pyramid, the tip, with the greatest level of protection. And that's why the non-urban and the R districts are identified.
Commissioner Broyles.
I'm tagging along with Commissioner Helfrey's comment about that particular property in cultural institutional area behind the YMCA, or not right behind the YMCA, but close enough to it to the south. Does the property owner have any responsibility if there's a hazardous issues in that parcel of land?
Well, from the perspective of the department, if there are hazardous conditions discovered as part of the application, so to speak, of the special circumstances overlay district, one of the requirements of the regulations is that a mitigation plan or a mitigation plan or a restoration plan, whatever you'd like to call it, be developed. So it's important to understand that the overlay district gives us additional tools to make sure that if this is an appropriate use and there is a mechanism or technology to make the site safe, that it is identified, required, and we get good testing, we get good reports, and at the end of the day, we feel comfortable in the decision.
So this is actually helps Wildwood create a more worthy way of identifying land or acreages of land that need to be noticed, and that's why we need this overlay designation.
I think it's a recognition that certain activities, either man-made or otherwise, have rendered properties less than suitable, and those less than suitable properties need greater scrutiny.
Thank you for that exclamation. Thank you.
My pleasure, ma'am.
Commissioner Cohn?
Yes, as regard to who has responsibility, if there's an environmental hazard on the property, everyone in the chain of title is responsible. So if a phase 2 detects, let's say Mr. Pruitt had an oil storage tank there and oil leaked, he would be responsible, that is if he was still alive. And everybody after that, including the bank, if they had a loan on the property. That's pretty much, I think, answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn.
And to tag along with that, I think that this is more common in a lot of ordinances than not when it comes to this type of activity. So most jurisdictions have a list of all of their sites or entities, or even, gas stations, fuel stations. They know where the historic nature of this is. And before you would buy a piece of property, if you do your due diligence, you would have a phase 1 environmental assessment completed to see what historical items are there, which is going back to what Mr. Cohn was saying. So I don't see any issues with this. It looks pretty good. But one question I have, it's not necessarily related to this, but Joe, how many phase 1s do we obtain ever? Do we even see it? I mean, if it were a private transaction, the buyer would probably request it from the seller. I don't know if they necessarily share that with the city.
In most of the planned residential development overlay districts, particularly in town center, we always include that as a condition in attachment B, and we provide it as part of the background materials. We feel that the Planning and Zoning Commission deserves to see that because it obviously was a key component in the decision to proceed forward with the project. So we get not a great number because we don't use the PRD that much outside town center, but we typically do see that.
All right, it's just one of those items that if it comes up negative, then we don't draw any attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hope. Obviously, if we identify a property and all the signals then tell us it's clean and not a risk to the public's health, safety, and general welfare, that's a win for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Young, do you have any other points you would like to make? And then I'll ask for a motion.
I have nothing further, Mr. Chair, unless there's any other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions, or I'll entertain a motion?
Again, Mr. Chair, the Department of Planning and the City Attorney respectfully request a motion to adopt the resolution as submitted.
I move that we adopt the resolution as submitted.
Okay, Commissioner Ward, need a second. Commissioner Broyles. Commissioner Broyles, comment?
No.
Okay.
No comment.
All right, we have a motion to approve the department's recommendation and a second. Roll call vote, Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes,
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Beatty,
Yes.
Commissioner Doppler,
Yes.
Chair Lee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Passes.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends our agenda. Does anybody have any general comments?
Just like to wish you all a happy new year, since this is the first time we're seeing you. It's a little late in January, but still happy new year. And we all wish you from here at City Hall that you stay safe and healthy until you get your vaccination.
Yeah, I'm assuming we're not going to be meeting in person until that time.
All the signals seem to indicate that there's still concerns that the rest of January and particularly February might be high-risk times. So I would suggest that at least through February, we continue to just hold the meetings on Zoom.
Okay, well, we'll see how this goes with the vaccine distribution. I need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Commissioner Beatty, second. Commissioner Depler. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, abstentions? Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Mr.
Good night,
Lee,
everybody.
Mr.
Bye.
Young,
Night.
can you stick around for a second?